Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today we have Dr. Mark Mirabello for our Halloween special. He's going to talk about secret societies. He's an author and college professor at Shawnee State in Ohio. Check him out. I think you'll dig it. Really interesting dude. See ya.
Mark Mirabello, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, sir.
We are down here at Shawnee State in Portsmouth, Ohio. Is that where we are?
Yes, right on the Ohio River.
This is a part of Ohio I have never been to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is so we're way down. We're literally feet away from the flood walls, keeping the Ohio River from taking over the whole campus. So.
Exactly. This was a poor design to put the university right on the river.
It's as close as you could possibly get.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we'll probably at some point within the next 200 years be underwater.
Sure.
But hopefully it will not happen while I'm here.
We could all be underwater in the next 200 years. We are in what looks like the Library of Alexandria here in your office. And just looking at the books on the wall, you have everything from world military power to Dracula, Edgar Allan Poe, and just about everything in between. It's a pretty amazing collection. What exactly do you teach down here?
Well, since we're a small university, and that's good for me, we only have 4 historians. So I'm technically the European historian, and I do the standard courses, but I have the opportunity to do unusual things, such as I have alternative religions and cults. A lot of the material we'll be talking about today comes from that. I have a course on intellectual history, which is a history of science. I have a course on myths and legends. I've got a course on fascist Europe and Nazi Germany. That's one course. I teach even ancient history because, again, I'm a generalist and I like to do a wide variety of things. So this creates the opportunity.
Yeah.
If I were at Ohio State, I would be teaching basically a 20-year period of European history.
Sure.
Because they have so many specialists.
Have you pigeonholed into that a little bit? It's nice that they give you that nice free reign. I noticed the statue of Thor, or was it Thor Odin over there?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's actually a Lovecraft statue next to it. I don't know if you can see it.
Uh-huh.
One of the Cthulhu legends there.
Okay.
These were gifts.
Yeah.
In fact, building my first book was on the Odin Brotherhood, which is a secret society, a pagan religion that I encountered while I was in Europe. And that's what started that interest. In fact, maybe I should mention that story. It's kind of colorful.
Yeah.
My various schools, my master's degree is from the University of Virginia. I'm always attracted to historical things. That's Tom Jefferson School. And then I got the opportunity to go to the University of Glasgow in Scotland, which is 1451 established. So it's been there for hundreds of years. Got a full scholarship back in the day when students did not get deeply in debt. In fact, I graduated with a PhD and had $30,000 left over.
Oh, wow.
This is how we mistreat students today.
Yeah, right.
And our education was that inferior. So I'm in bookstores, and I was in Glasgow and London, Edinburgh, and I'm in this bookstore in Leith, Scotland. And I'm looking at, just for the day, I was looking at this book on the Rosicrucians, which is a sort of legendary secret society, a Christian secret society from the 17th century, the Brotherhood of the Rose Cross. Their symbol is literally the crucified rose. And this unusual man, dressed in tweed, Eastern European accent, starts a conversation. First thing he said was, when I was holding the book, he said, "We're under the rose." Now, sub rosa, under the rose, means the conversation is secret. And then he sort of bantered with me, made a few kind of interesting remarks. And I thought, well, this guy's really interesting. And then I didn't see him again. But then sometime later, I started to receive cryptic messages. And essentially was invited to a meeting in London.
Yeah.
Now, the very first time, and I had to take a train ride.
This sounds like a Harry Potter story.
Yeah. And I've always been intrigued by mystery.
Right.
In fact, it gets stranger. Later, I was receiving letters from postmarked Germany, allegedly from the god Odin. Mm-hmm. Now, again, I will make it clear when we discuss things today, and I tell my students this, that I deal in beliefs, not facts.
Exactly, sure.
So we'll be talking about conspiracy theories, secret societies, legends, and so forth. I'm not trying to get anyone to believe this stuff. It's simply, what do people believe? Because remember, in fact, even a false belief can be a factor in history. Reminds me, just to be semi-humorous, 1848, a rumor spread in Sri Lanka, then called Ceylon, that a new tax was going to be imposed on the people, can't make this stuff up, based on women's breast size.
Okay.
And it caused riots and an uprising. Now, of course, in the 20th century, you have the case of the infamous Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is supposed to be teaching about a secret meeting that occurs every year. Now, again, this is totally fictional. Mm-hmm. We think it was concocted by the Russian secret police in the Tsarist era. It's rabidly anti-Semitic, of a Jewish plot to take over the world. Now, Hitler refers to this in his Mein Kampf. The Nazis took it seriously. In fact, if you look at National Socialist ideology, they take some of the ideas in the protocols and reverse them, thinking now the Aryans will use these tricks that our Jewish enemy was using against us. Now, again, as far as we know, the whole story is totally fabricated, but it shows how it can be a force in history.
Yeah.
Now, back to this Odin Brotherhood thing, I got an invitation to show up at a meeting in London for dinner. I show up, and the address didn't exist. And I'm thinking, wow, that's rather curious. So I go to the location, there's no such address. So I eventually go back to Glasgow by train, and then I got a second invitation. And again, they gave me an address, different address, and a time. The first one had a time as well. And I show up, and this time the address was real, and no one was there. Now, incidentally, I'd read enough about secret societies. This is a soft core version of what's called an ordeal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
test.
Run
around, seeing if
it's
you're willing
test.
to go through all this.
Yes. Yeah. So then sometimes later, and in pagan lore, 3 is always a significant number.
Okay.
And these are supposed to be guys dedicated to the Norse gods. Odin, Thor, Frey, Heimdall, so forth. So the third invitation, which I anticipated was going to be real, they gave me a time, a location, date, and so forth. I show up, and they're there. And I met with them, and we were just talking at dinner. It was nothing unusual or sinister or
they're
threatening.
They're not dressed in flowing robes
no,
and helmets
no,
on or anything
no,
like this?
No. In fact, over the years, because now we have to fast forward, this is in the 1980s. Over the years, I've tended to, when I do study people that do the unusual, I prefer to work with Europeans or even people like Australians. Because when Americans get involved in unusual things, they frankly have to flaunt it and live it.
Right.
So,
which is very hard to keep a secret society going if you flaunt it.
Well, also, if they're over the top. I remember going to a meeting with this American Odinist, and I go to this 5-star restaurant. In fact, it was outside of Cleveland, and I walk in, and this guy's...
Do you remember what restaurant this was?
You know, I can't remember.
We happen to have the only 5-star restaurant
in the
state of Ohio right by our house.
Actually, I must be. It's a nice restaurant. I was using 5-star.
Okay,
yes.
It could be my own town.
Actually, I think it was a J. Alexander's, so I'm exaggerating there. That's not really a high end, but comparatively, but it is in Portsmouth, Ohio. But at any rate, I walk in, and this guy stands up and says, right in the crowded restaurant, "Hail Odin!" So, but when I met with these people, and they were interesting. And including, for example, this German woman who claimed she had met the god Tyr, who was hitchhiking on a German road.
Yeah.
Gave him a ride. And
very Neil Gaiman-like.
Yes. Yeah. Well, by the way, I did read. I was interested in when he came out with that American Gods. Yeah. I did. I have to confess. Now, I'm not criticizing him in any way. He's a successful writer, very talented. But the way he was depicting these gods was, he's having Odin at a urinal carrying on a conversation and molesting little girl waitresses. He was kind of, but again, the whole notion is any kind of publicity, I guess, is good.
Sure.
But, so anyway, that's how I started. And I asked them if I could write material on this Odin Brotherhood. And they, in fact, these are really, again, I think people in secret societies learn a kind of cryptic demeanor, and they almost, I don't know if this is real, but they almost act as if, this is the Norns who decree fate, this is your destiny to do this. And, it wasn't a coincidence that I got this scholarship at Glasgow that took me from Virginia, and they, again, whether or not this is believable is another issue, but once you start thinking those terms, you start to think there are no coincidences.
Sure.
That things are being altered behind the scenes. Which reminds me, for your listeners, if they're interested in the subject, people like media, there's, of all things, a TV movie that was released in the 1970s called The Brotherhood of the Bell. And it is by far the best. It's got Glenn Ford. Now, a lot of modern students, my young people in my class,
I remember the name.
But. I think in the original Superman film, he's really old, and I think he plays the foster father.
Okay.
Ma and Pa Kent. That's when he was older. He was a leading man type in the 50s and late 40s. Not the square jolly, but typically a hero type. And this Brother of the Bell was made for TV, and it's available now.
Probably on YouTube somewhere.
Yeah, and it's really well done because it shows how they work. And in a nutshell, he's a college student, and a lot of people I notice on reviews on Amazon, they automatically think it's based on the Skull and Bones, and they may have influenced it, but it's not necessarily just that group. And he's being initiated as a college student, and then he becomes a psychology professor, and he's very successful. He's got a really good tenured job, and he's approached when he's in his middle age, and he's told that his friend who's coming up for tenure, they want him to vote against this guy, that tenure. And Glenn Forn says, well, he's talented and so on and so forth. He's my friend. And they tell him this is what we want. And then he's acting as if, well, how can you tell me what to do? And it's explained to him that every book he's ever published has been published or written. Every book he's ever written has been published. It's been a success. It's reviewed favorably. Every job he's applied for, he's received it. Every promotion he has ever sought, he's gotten it. And they say, do you think this is a coincidence?
Yeah.
And now we want payback.
Right.
Well, in the film, I won't tell all the details, but he finally does vote against, and then this is a bit over the top, the man commits suicide as a result. And that leads Glenn Ford onto a quest to expose these people, even though they've benefited him. And the way they destroy him is quite interesting. He has the opportunity, for example, to be on this, basically a talk show, some of what we're doing now. And just before the interview, the interviewer is telling him, oh, this is interesting material. I want you to talk freely. And as soon as he's out there on the set being filmed, the interviewer turns on him and ridicules him.
Yeah.
And incidentally, again, a lot of this will be international probably, but a lot of the listeners are American. And Americans in particular have just zero tolerance when they hear the phrase conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And that's a mistake.
Well, it got created by the CIA to kind of get people to stop paying attention to these things?
In a sense, there are, almost certainly some of these have been created by intelligence services. Now, I mentioned earlier the infamous protocols, which is probably Russian Tsar secret police. In the United States, one that just pops in my head is the USS General Greeley. It was an American ship that docked in 1950 in New York Harbor. It had a cargo that was under heavy guard, and the soldiers were on a need-to-know basis. They were not told what was in the cargo, where it was going to go, and so forth. The cargo is brought to New York Harbor, then it's put on a really secure train, and under heavy guard taken directly to Fort Knox, which, of course, the gold, that's another conspiracy theory, is the gold there.
Is it even there, right?
By the way, the Chinese, I'll get back to all this in a moment, but the Chinese purchased some gold in about 10 years ago that had the imprint of Fort Knox on it and discovered it had been salted. Now what that means is tungsten is a metal that costs about $1 a pound. It, strangely enough, has the same density roughly as gold. And there have been allegations people drill gold bars out and put tungsten in there. In fact, if the government's not doing it, you have to be really aware if you're buying gold coins and gold bullion and so forth. There are people that do that.
Right.
And it's if it's done correctly, if they melt the gold, put the tungsten in, and recast it, it's virtually impossible to tell without drilling what you have. Now, the USS General Greeley lands. They take this cargo to Fort Knox, which is guarded by 30,000 soldiers on the base. And a rumor circulated, unclear, but probably secretly released by the military, that they had because this is post-Roswell and flying saucer stuff, 1950. Roswell's in 1947. By the way, Roswell, within a short time of Roswell in 47, you have the establishment of the CIA and also the Air Force. It used to be part of the Army Air Corps. Is this just a coincidence?
Yeah.
Well, the rumor spread they had part of a flying saucer in the cargo. we learned in the 1970s the truth. The United States government, during World War II, had actually stolen the Hungarian crown jewels. They did it because they wanted to keep them out of the hands of the communists.
Sure.
And that's what was there. Jimmy Carter returned the jewels, and that's how the story came out.
Yeah.
But so that's why some really extreme stories are actually fabrications to delude the public.
Right.
Now, the magician's trick is the magician always gets you to watch his right hand, and then the real activity is from the left. So when you hear unusual stories, this could happen. Now, another, by the way, point of alarm to the public, another trick that's used, if someone does try to reveal a kind of hidden secret, they don't try to deny it. They attack the person revealing.
Sure. They go back to his high school, what he did in high school, or
Yes.
his 3 ex-wives, or whatever.
Well, Julian Assange claims that he's been set up,
Yeah.
and almost certainly has been.
Mm-hmm.
Although he should have been known better when he had sexual activities with these women in Sweden, that this could turn on you, go south pretty quickly. But he is convinced that the American government's behind it, and we don't really know for a fact.
Right. He's held up in that embassy right now.
Yes.
What has it been for 10 years? He's been
Not that long, but it's been several years,
Yeah.
maybe 6. I can't remember the exact date. That Chelsea Manning got, I think, a 35-year prison sentence. Now they released, he was a heathen, now her.
Right.
But they will come down.
Yeah.
Oh, and speaking of which, when I'm talking about unusual groups, I want to alarm people, especially if, I don't know if we'll talk about them today, but there are various, especially right-wing groups, Ku Klux Klan, various types of, for example, the Phineas priesthood, which is supposed to be, I'll just mention it now, it's supposed to be ultra-fundamentalist men. They've got a really conservative but also violent ideology. And they're convinced, now incidentally, their ideology is actually Bible-based. What they're doing is in the Bible. Mm-hmm. If I hear one more time where a person will say, where did they get all this violence from?
Right.
Well, I mean, these people are out reading the Bible, especially the Old Testament.
Right.
Even in the New Testament, Jesus gets really tough in the book of Revelation.
There's some points where Jesus, really goes off.
Yeah,
Turning over tables and
and yes, but I mean Revelations, he's starting to take names and kick behind.
Yeah.
Although the Eastern Orthodox Church, for the record, has never accepted Book of Revelation as scripture, because it's curious, it becomes fundamental to a lot of extremist cults over here, probably because they read Greek, and anyone who reads it can tell the Greek style is very different from the Gospel of John. Mm-hmm. Clearly the same guy didn't write this. Well, at any rate, the Phineas priesthood will kill, and they're actually killing people, abortion providers, because and also women who get abortions, if they have the opportunity, because they view it as murder. They will also kill, now, strangely enough, the Old Testament does not mention lesbianism at all. The New Testament does. Paul says they go to the lake of fire. But the Old Testament gives the death penalty for gay men. Mm-hmm. And they kill gay men. And they also will kill bankers, because the Old Testament actually condemns charging interest on loans. In fact, in the Mosaic Law, Jews were allowed, again, this is called in-group, out-group morality, which all secret societies have. One set of rules for insiders, one set of rules for outsiders.
Right.
And Americans do it. We pretend we don't, but we do.
We all do it. We all do it within our groups.
Yes. Americans, for example, will kill several thousand people that captured Noriega, the dictator in Panama, and they'll announce we caught this drug dealer. Imagine if they did that in Detroit.
Right.
Killed 5,000 people and said, we got the drug dealer. There'd be outrage.
Yeah.
Well, at any rate, they will kill bankers and then what they call race traders. Now, in fact, they're named after Phineas in the Old Testament. Now, Phineas is actually a relative of Moses and Aaron, his brother. And he gets the priesthood forever, his family. Because when they come back, they're on one of their various travels, there's one man has been married to a Gentile woman. And they make an announcement, you got to put away all of your outside women. And he refuses. Now, in our King James Version, they sanitize this. He actually spears the man and his Gentile wife through the groin, kills them. Mm-hmm. And he's blessed by God. for this.
Right.
And again, these people think that they call them race traders. And now again, I want to emphasize, we talked before the recorder was going. Again, for your audience, when I teach classes, I deal in beliefs, not facts. So I'm not trying to say in any way this is true, but to understand these groups, they have a really violent ideology, which essentially, and this is what's confusing, if you walk up to one, they believe in Darwin. Mm-hmm. And that throws people.
That's really off, yeah.
Most Bible fundamentalists do not. But see, they call them mud people. Mm-hmm. They're racist, they don't like non-white people, and they say that they call mud people evolved from animals.
Right.
And they say that Adam, now again, this is racism, just a belief, not a fact, is actually, it was created by God. He's the first Aryan. And they say, now, the way you can tell an Aryan is they have blood in the face. Mm-hmm. You can blush. Now, black people blush, but it's not visible. And then they're even more sinister on Jewish people. Now, they teach that when Satan's never mentioned my name as the serpent, but everybody believes it's the devil. He didn't tempt Eve. He had sex with her. Now, strangely enough, that's actually in the Talmud commentary, which are Jewish commentaries by the rabbis. In fact, since they're more sophisticated on their interpretation of the Old Testament, and again, if the people out here, some of them are Christian, Jews, for example, do not think the entire Old Testament is of equal value. The first 5 books are the law, the Torah, far more sacred than the rest. Then you have books of history, like 1st and 2nd Samuel's, books of prophecy, like Isaiah. No pious Jew would say that a quote from Psalms is equal to a quote from Genesis, Exodus, and so forth. And then they go on to say that, now originally Hebrew is written without consonants. And that if you add up all the consonants, I forget the number, of the first 5 books, it spells the true name of God. It's all one solid block. Mm-hmm. And incidentally, rabbis teach you must be really careful, because if anyone who's not properly purified and doesn't know what he's doing pronounces the true name of God and he's not properly prepared, he will turn into a heap of black ashes. And I always tell students in class, you were playing Scrabble with your little brother and suddenly you see black ashes. He was trying to get this on Scrabble.
How has this not become a horror movie at the same time?
Now, the Talmud and Kabbalah, which, now, by the way, the Talmud are rabbinical commentaries on the Torah. And then the Kabbalah, and incidentally, we had years ago, what's her name? I can't remember the rock, Madonna.
Yeah. And
she was acting like she had joined a Kabbalah group.
It's supposed to be a very mystical, magic society of Judaism.
Yes. What she was basically working with a corrupt rabbi in Los Angeles that was not actually doing the real stuff. This is not to be taught to outsiders. In fact, even pious Jews are not supposed to just randomly read the Kabbalah. In fact, the lore is you spend a rabbi will notice a young man who's especially devout, and he'll spend roughly 40 years testing, training, once again the ordeal. Mm-hmm. And then when the man reaches 40, he's then told, this is what we're really involved in. And the story is the Kabbalah was given when Adam is expelled from the Garden of Eden. He gets this secret knowledge to help, now again, the chosen people, to help them in their travails. And incidentally, the Torah is written for the Hebrew people. It's not written for outsiders. Often, again, Christians read it as if it's for the human race, but it's actually clearly written for this group. At any rate, the point is that in Hebrew, the tree of knowledge, which is prohibited, in Hebrew, the verb to know is the same as the verb to have sex with. Anybody who knows Hebrew knows this. And so it's sexual knowledge, which is interesting because if you look at the line of biology, as soon as animals start to reproduce sexually, there's death. That bacteria that you kill with your Lysol may have lived millions of years. It doesn't die. It doesn't grow and die. Now, bacteria can be killed. Amoebas can be killed. through violence. Kind of like pagan gods can be killed through violence. But they don't automatically die as we do. And it is curious. In fact, our cells are designed to replicate so many times and then it stops.
Right.
The Hayflick limit, it's called. We're designed to self-destruct. It does seem intentional. Now, oddly enough, we were talking on the way up, cancer cells are immortal. They will endlessly replicate. In fact, some years ago, there was this Australian fellow that was, again, ultra-fringe. He was saying the reason we're developing cancer is the human race is gradually becoming immortal. In the short term, it's killing us.
Right.
But eventually we'll be huge malignancies. And we will live forever as cancer cells.
Right.
But again, he was just mocked and thrown out.
It's interesting. You know,
Yes.
my wife worked with cancer patients, and we had a cancer doctor on the show, and it's a very interesting theory, but I have heard of that before.
Yes.
So,
although the problem is, if you believe in conspiracy theories, my mother died of cancer. I've got it. I remember when my father took her for their first treatment. This was in the 1970s. His comment was, my dad was always this sort of really practical, old school from the Depression era. And he said he saw the money involved. He said they're never going to cure
it's an
this.
incredible amount of money.
Yeah.
When I look at, and I wanted to talk to you later about this, but when I look at your desk, some of the things that might help you is getting rid of the sugar. I look at your desk right now, and you've got vanilla espresso and a Welsh grape juice, and one of the things we talked about with that cancer doctor, Dr. Lisa Arfons, was the effect that sugar has on cancer cells. So maybe after this, I'll switch your whole diet around. We'll get rid of the inflammation. We'll start turning things around for you.
And again, if your audience has ever seen a picture, this guy's pretty buff here, tough guy. So you're far more physically fit than I am.
I'm going to put down a full-on diet program for you. We're going to fight this thing internally.
Now, if I could mention that Phineas priesthood, though. So what happened is that they literally believe, and the Phineas priesthood has picked this up. This is this ultra-Christian group, that Eve had sex with the devil. The Kabbalah says the Satan injected filth into her. Now here's where it gets really nasty. This is the really vicious racism. Now again, not to offend anybody.
Sure, it is what it is.
Yeah, they literally think that's where the Jewish people come from. The devil having sex with Eve. Now again, ridiculous notion. But you see why it's dangerous. These guys think they kill a 12-year-old boy who's Jewish. They're killing the son of Satan. And they're taking texts. Jesus says he's arguing with some Pharisees, and he calls them the children of the devil. And then the book of Revelation refers to the synagogue of Satan and says there are people who claim to be Jews who are not. And they rip these out of context. Yeah. Now, they think then that Satan had sex with Adam. And that's the first gay sex. So
this group feels that way.
Yes, this group feels that. And so they kill gay men. And they kill what they call race traitors.
I think it's pretty easy to take things you see in the Bible and twist it to match whatever you want to do here in the 21st century and make things that way. A lot of people have claimed Adam as their they can trace their roots all the way back to Adam, giving them the right to be the chosen people. Is this where we have is this where the hatred kind of started for the Jewish people throughout the world? I mean, it's always seemed to me that there was just some there's this hatred by lots of groups towards the Jewish people, and it's very hard to trace where that came from. Now, I understand the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict and why that started, but long before that, we were having Jewish people.
Well, you're exactly right. By the way, I didn't mean to turn this into neo-Nazi stuff.
Turn it whatever you want, Doc.
No, but and again, I want people, and I should caution, this is how I brought it up too, that your listeners should not go to neo-Nazi Klan extremist websites, because a lot of these are fake, and they'll get on lists because they're run by the government and various groups, and then they'll start being monitored.
Right. Looking at you through your webcam.
Yes. And again, it's malicious stuff, and you want to stay away from these sites. But again, I always have to caution young men. Women will stay away from these, but young men, they get curious.
Sure.
And it's dangerous material. Now, I should mention, because you asked where did anti-Semitism come from. Now, a common one is that Christians in the Middle Ages hated them because of the crucifixion material, but we see it among the ancient Greeks. And what it really is, I think, like a lot of, and this is in fact why I think a lot of historians, too specialized, they can't really put their head around what's going on. the reason for the dislike is they're an enclave group. They, again, have in-group, out-group morality. They tend to intermarry. Any group that does that is going to be persecuted by the society at large. And it's a shame, but it happens. And by the way, with the current protests, we forget if you're a minority, you're exposed. And we have people today, for example, not to get on this gay rights issue again, but saying you can't treat me this way and I'm going to protest and so forth. You have to be really careful if you're a minority. And I think Jewish people, they've survived for thousands of years, understand this. You can't get too aggressive or vocal because the majority will quickly turn on you. Now, let's switch, and for example, the hatred directed, now another enclave group, Scientology. Now, I'm not trying to recommend, I'm not a Scientologist, not recommending, but the out-of-control hostility and hatred directed to these people, to me, is bizarre.
I think a lot of that comes from Tom Cruise being on TV and saying ridiculous things that, he's the face, he becomes the face of that whole religion.
But I think also what's happening is it's an enclave group that has claiming special knowledge. And when you do this, now, for example, they have the upper levels. A person who wants to be in Scientology goes with auditing procedure, and you become a clear, and then you're invited, if you are successful, to go to the upper levels, and that's supposed to be kept secret. Yeah. And some years ago, and this shows, frankly, I think, the ignorance of the general American public. They were poking fun that allegedly, because this is all secret, the upper level 3 talks about this alien being called Xenu. And they put it in a South Park episode, and everybody's laughing at it. If anyone knows anything about religious history, if you look at Hindu and Jain religious texts from India, they talk about times millions of years ago where there are civilizations on other planets, flying spacecraft,
Vimanas,
yes,
battles in the sky,
yes, and it's modern people hear this and say, "Oh, he's a sci-fi writer, L. Ron Hubbard. He was just putting sci-fi in there." We don't know if this didn't happen. And incidentally, historians are bad because your listeners do not realize that they sanitize everything. Phlegon of Tralles was a Greek writer. And in a matter-of-fact way, now he collects unusual things, kind of the way I do. He talks about, on an island outside of Athens, they found a coffin roughly the size of a football field, 300 feet long, and roughly. And inside, the mummified remains, a decomposing body, of a man dressed in clothing, and they found an inscription that said he died after 5,000 years. I mean, try to find that in a standard history book. Now, again, if you know Eastern lore, the Jains talk about, they talk about history's an endless cycle. And it's a turning of a wheel. First of all, the Jain religion teaches we've always been here. This is, again, an idea found in frankly, Scientology. They call it a thetan. Jains call it a jiva. And we are an indestructible soul. We're all powerful. We don't realize it. Again, very similar to Scientology. Over time, we've got diluted, what Hubbard calls the game. In Jainism, it's basically karma. And we've forgotten who we are. Well, they think that history goes through progress and then degeneration. It's the endless turning of a wheel. Now, right now, we're in the downturn of the wheel. That's why we only live 120 years, and we're 6 feet tall. They say at the end of the cycles, we'll be about 18 inches tall. I'm sorry, it's about maybe 3 feet tall, and we'll be living 18 years. Right. And we'll live in caves, religion will disappear, all technology, and we'll become animal-like, stupid, bizarre creatures. But then the wheel starts to turn, and it starts to go up. Now, as it goes up, at the top, there are intelligent beings in the universe that are miles high and live for millions of years. And they say as the wheel goes down, there are people that are 300 feet tall and live for 5,000 years. Yeah. Now, again, is this happening?
Well, there was record. I mean, we've dealt with records from Egypt and of these kings that lasted, or
in Sumeria too.
Sumeria,
yes,
right?
Yes.
That's what I was trying to keep of these kings that had 5,000-year dynasties, and it always seems to me that, yes, that sounds, way outside the bounds of reality, but so does getting two of every animal to come onto an ark and survive a major flood. A flood that's been talked about through every major history and every major culture throughout the world.
Certainly something happened. Well, by the way, I should also mention, because we were talking about secret societies and earlier history, one thing that's a widespread myth, which is really interesting. We find it in Australia among the Aboriginal people. We find it in Patagonia in South America, extreme part, that there's a secret society of men. And by the way, originally secret societies are always gender specific. Eliade, the late professor Mirsha Eliade, claimed that when you start getting women and men in secret societies together, they're doomed. It's a sign of decadence.
That's probably true.
Skull and Bones, for example, they've now started to admit women. The Yale Secret Society in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. It'll kill it off because women do not do the weird things men do.
Sure.
If you look at Freemasonic rituals, now again they're supposed to be secret, but a guy named Pritchard published these in the 18th century. They have they're tied up. They wear blindfolds. They take oaths about getting their intestines ripped out and their heart ripped out. Women in the Eastern Star, female version, they wear a translucent veil. They talk by candlelight, and they take these really pleasant vows with soft music playing.
Sure.
So we tried to deny genders in our culture, but clearly it's the case. Now, back to, I was talking again about these secret societies. We find this, it's really ancient, that at one time, women ruled through magic. They had the power of death and life through magic. Now, traditional cultures, even the Egyptians, thought that no death is natural. You're killed by magic, and you can use magic to stay alive in the afterlife. Well, the men got together, formed a conspiracy, secret society, and they killed, the story is that the girls were taught the magic at puberty rituals. They were initiated when they became women. Now, historically, societies always treat, when children go through puberty, they're treated as adults. We've invented adolescence. Mm-hmm. We've invented 30-year-olds in the basement.
Yeah, right.
But originally, you go through puberty rituals, you become a man, even if you're 13 years old. Well, at any rate, the women becoming women, and these men got together and murdered every adult woman past puberty, and kept the little girls and then trained them to be slaves. And the story is, that's why men dominate. We seize power from the women who used to have it through magic. We find the same myth all over the world.
Really?
Yes. And what's interesting, too, among the Aboriginal people in Australia, who are really fascinating people, and the British didn't know what to make of them when they arrived in the 18th century. The British are like Americans. We judge by technology. Mm-hmm. And the Aboriginal people had never even seen water boil. They had the boomerang, but they didn't have the bow and arrow. They'd never seen water boil. They didn't have clothing in the interior. They lived in nests, not really houses. And the British in the 19th century, actually in Tasmania, they would hunt them on weekends. Yeah. It was called hunting abos. They shot them for fun. Yeah. Well, their culture is actually really intriguing, and they're clearly preserving original notions of the human race. One thing, how many times do you hear people say in America, the pious people, well, we've never found a religion or a culture without God. Mm-hmm. Sure we have. The Central Australians had no gods at all. But they had ghosts. And what happens is you die, you come back. You spend a time as a dead person and you're reborn. The dead never leave the world. They go to sacred sites and reborn.
Without you really don't need it. There's no need for a God in that religion.
Mm-hmm. And almost certainly that's God develops out of concepts of the dead. Mm-hmm. Almost certainly. But at any rate, these people will have, and it's really curious. Now again, it's not all the Aboriginals the same, but in the interior they practice a really harsh version of circumcision. Now, again, people don't even know what circumcision is anymore. They think it's for health or whatever, or they denounce it. Clearly, it's a religious ritual. And in fact, the Mali, I should say the Dogon in Africa, in this country of Mali, they almost certainly preserve the original, which is, strangely enough, the little girls, as they go through puberty,
Right.
they practice female circumcision, which the clitoris is removed,
Right.
which to us is horrifying.
Yeah.
And then they circumcise the males. Now, what they think that is, they notice little boys and little girls resemble each other. And when you circumcise them, you're making the girl a total woman, because the removal of the clitoris is her man trait. If you give male hormones to women, the clitoris grows. Mm-hmm. So clearly there's a connection here.
Right.
And by male circumcision, they're making him a pure man. Now, when the Aboriginal people in Australia, in the interior, they not only circumcise, they slit the male organ and then force it open so that it heals, so that it resembles the vagina. And they have to urinate squatting.
Wow.
And clearly, this is showing they're trying to make the men look like women.
Right.
And during the initiation, the boys have to show great strength and not be afraid. Oh, by the way, I should mention, these are traditional rituals. I doubt they're doing it anymore.
Yeah, and don't try this at home.
Yeah, I'm sure since, this is when the British were there originally.
Yeah.
Now, at any rate, when they initiated the boys, they told them the little boys would grow up with the women. The adult men had nothing to do with the little boys. And then when they went through the ceremony, they then associated with with the men. And they told them the secret of male domination when they circumcised him, and said, we've taken it from them and it's a trick. Mm-hmm. There's no male power.
Right.
We've done it through trickery. And all secret societies are based on power, frankly, and creating an in-group, out-group. Now, typically when people get involved in them, they don't realize there's often inner circles. England has 600,000 Freemasons. And most of those, though, it's for social reasons. You may make a business connection, a social activity, but the real function is the upper levels. There's 33 degrees total. And oddly enough, someone in the fourth upper level is higher than the head of all the Freemasons in England, because he's in the upper level. Now, to join the Freemasons, and I can talk about this because I'm not a Freemason. They take oaths. To join it, you have to approach them. They will never invite you to join. And you need a couple supporters. They vote on you, and they put the white or black balls down. That's where you get blackballing term. So if one person throws a black ball into the container, you don't get in. Okay. And then you go through 3 degrees, becoming a master mason. You get secret information, including, for example, at the 3rd level, the Freemasonic sign of distress, which if you go into a courtroom, you do this hoping that someone on the jury or the judge or the district attorney will recognize it.
I assume it takes a lot to get to that stage.
This is it.
Yeah.
And now they can't see it.
Yeah, so he just put his hands up like the field goals insignia,
Well, roughly. But the thing is, Charles Manson used it in court.
Really?
Yeah, he was familiar with this stuff. And of course they just ignored him because they knew what he was doing. What's interesting is once you know, and I'm working on a book on all this. This is why
we'll talk about.
Well, I mean, it's in the early stages, but once you start looking for it, not just the Freemasons, you'll see political figures and also in written text, people giving signs to other people and to the public, and the public doesn't even recognize it. Years ago, and this happened to me 3 times. I've taught for many years. Sadly, I'm old. A student turned in a final exam, and he drew his A's. He had written a capital A, like a large capital A, but instead of just the crossbeam, he made another kind of angular device. And he's trying to show, the Freemason. He's sending a message to me, if I'm a Freemason, give me an A.
Help him out, yeah.
And incidentally, Americans, this is why we're naive people. Real life is about connections and power. And Americans think that if they get a job, it's because they're the best candidate. Mm-hmm. If they win an election, they're the best candidate. And this is not how it works. Now, we both have Italian names. The Italians, especially the South Italians. Mm-hmm. My people were from Bovino, which is in Apulia.
We were southern. I don't know where. I just found out that we're southern Italy.
Oddly enough, most of the northern Italians went to South America, like in Argentina, Uruguay, and most South Italians came here. So that's, if you meet an Italian descent person in the United States, almost certainly it's South Italians. Mm-hmm. and this even clarifies why secret societies exist. So you remember the Drangheta, which is a group in Calabria. Most Americans never heard of it. We always talk about the mafia in Sicily, even the Camorra in Naples. They're different in a sense. The Drangheta come from Calabria, which is the poorest area of Italy, by far. And because they were poor, in fact, in the northern Italians, they do these things that northern Americans do to people, Yankees, to the southerners, they call them names and disparage them. And the northern Italians do this. They call them, essentially, it means dirt people.
Right.
And they don't like them. And they act like, this sort of thing. Well, the Drangheta have a famous line when they join this. We were despised, and now we're feared. And anyone who knows someone in the Drangheta, I don't care how rich he is from Milan, they're going to make way for these guys.
Sure.
And it's about power. And again, the Sicilian mob. And by the way, in America, I don't know what it is. It's probably the prosperity. America tends to corrupt tradition of everybody. And the American mob is a corrupt caricature of the original Italian mobs. They bear no resemblance.
Right.
Lucky Luciano, he was the famous American gangster that was exiled after World War II, released from prison and exiled. He thought he was a mobster. They're going to treat him. When he got to Italy, the Sicilian mob swindled him.
Yeah.
Because they thought, who do you think you are? This is not.
And the old Soprano episodes where they would go over to Italy and they thought they were hot shit. They just treated them like garbage while they were over there, like hillbillies. Mm-hmm.
The main thing, too, is over there, for example, if we focus on Sicily, they were invaded 6 times and conquered.
Sicily was a huge point of contention to the entire ancient world. And
yes.
Everybody wanted Sicily.
Oh, and by the way, in Roman times, the richest part of Italy by far was South Italy. By far. And incidentally, in American history, before the Civil War, the richest part of America was the South.
Yeah.
The South had 1/3 of the free population, 2/3 of the rich people. Now they were outnumbered 4.5 to 1 in terms of free people. That's why they lost the war. But there was a lot of anger towards their wealth.
Right.
And speaking of which, we talked earlier how history is distorted. Man, if you read History of American Civil War, it's just a massive tie of lies. How many Americans realize through the entire Civil War, there were over 400,000 slaves in the Union, toiling away. In the Union.
Yeah.
It was not fought over slavery. The reason Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, it's an old trick. It's used many times in history. When the Thebans invaded the Laconia of the Spartans, they announced the Helots were free.
Right.
Because you wanted,
I get it.
You get them to rise up, stop working, and turn on the
Spartans would have been outnumbered. That was the whole reason for the Spartan war culture, was to keep the Helots under control.
When Alaric, the German invader, attacked the city of Rome, he announced everybody inside was free. Romans had thousands of slaves. Now, they did not practice racial slavery.
Right.
In fact, their favorite slaves were Greeks, had the highest price. They thought they were clever and intelligent. And oddly enough, there's a famous letter from, I think it's Cato the Elder, I forget. But he's advising one of his friends on buying a slave, and he says, because again, it's often quoted in black history textbooks, he says, above all, he's listing various types of slaves, and he says, whatever you do, don't buy one from Britain, because they're really stupid and lazy. And so it again shows how racism they changed the names of who the victim is. That's really
interesting. I had no idea that was, but it makes total sense. It does not surprise me that the Civil War, the motivating factor was not actually slavery. I think that has been exaggerated, since its inception.
And incidentally, the Grant family owned slaves and the Lee family did not.
Right.
Now, if you ask an American historian, they'll say, well, it was Mrs. Grant. Well, what's this? And women didn't control the stuff. I should also mention, we've actually unintentionally set ourselves up for a similar maneuver. The slaves will be liberated to rise up. The United States is so in debt with mortgages, education debt, credit card debt. At some point, if we don't fix this, we'll have an invader. A Chinese army will land, and they'll announce,
you're free.
Everybody's debt is erased. And you don't have to pay your mortgage. And how many people will be willing to shoot at an army that then it says you don't have to pay your mortgage anymore. If we keep going the way we're going, because again, debt slavery is a form of slavery. Actually, we have slavery in the United States. The purest form is in the prison because they're bossed around, and if you have a life sentence, you're a real slave. The only part that's not true is your son won't inherit, but you're a slave. Oddly enough, soldiers are treated as temporary slaves. If they run away, they're pursued like fugitives, and if they're caught, they're punished. And for the record, because along the Ohio River, everybody here in Portsmouth area thinks their ancestors were helping the Underground Railroad.
Right.
Again, this is myth. Probably far more people who were freed. The high estimate is 70,000 over the entire Underground Railroad, which is pretty substantial.
Sure, absolutely.
But far more were actually free blacks picked up in the north, hit over the head, sold south.
Yeah.
They had a reverse Underground Railroad in places like Ohio, in New England, New York. Free black people could not go out at night, and they had to carry papers. Now, if you had the paper, it didn't matter because they could just steal it from you. And some of these tricks were pretty sophisticated. They would see a man with a disability. For example, he'd have a finger missing. And then they would post a fugitive slave announcement that a guy answering to this name has a little finger missing. And then he'd go to court. Yes. So the American, and incidentally, we have the statue destruction going on.
Right.
And if Americans knew history, we wouldn't have statues to anybody. Because frankly, you can find some weird background material on everybody.
Sure.
And
founding fathers were all
yes,
had all weird things going on in their past.
And I guarantee you now, we are doing stuff today that is admirable and respectable that in 100 years will be a crime. And we don't know what it is yet. Because, again, now, we mentioned if the Chinese invade, incidentally, during World War II, I should mention, when the USSR invaded, one of the first things they did is open up all the prisons.
Yeah.
And they said that if you were in a capitalist prison, you were the enemy of the ruling class, or you were a victim of the ruling class. So you don't deserve. And then they would shoot and throw in prison the rich people.
Right.
And speaking of flexibility, this always stuns students when I talk about it. I always thought the Russians were they're far more, I don't know what it is. They have a greater flexibility and intelligence than we do. We're too simplistic. You've all heard of the infamous, Stalin gulags, where political prisoners sent. If you were a prisoner in a Soviet gulag and you behaved yourself, they could take you out and make you a guard. And in fact, they may even make you the warden.
Right.
You start out as a prison. You can't even think of that in America, where
we'll worked in a jail for 19 years.
You can't. And then also, if you were a warden or a guard, you could end up in the gulag.
Right. Just reverse it.
And there's this flexibility that went on that that just seems unimaginable, because we are essentially, again, we both have the Italian names, but this is an Anglo-Saxon Germanic culture, and there's a stiffness about Germanic thinkers. They have, these are the rules.
Right.
And in America, when there's a fugitive breaks out of prison, and he's on the run, everybody's calling in. It's on CNN. They're running the pictures. In Italy and Greece, they actually help fugitives.
Right.
They don't even care what you do because they feel he's being victimized. And this guy may be a murderer. There are books published on the so-called rat lines after World War II. Nuns, priests, and Italians were helping Nazis and fascists to get out, to go to Argentina. And they're saying these were evil people. Why didn't you catch them? Well, that's just Italian culture. They don't ask any questions. And I know for a fact, my father, he passed away sadly, but in his culture, if I've never committed a crime, but if I had committed a crime, he would have helped me to get away.
Sure.
They don't say, whereas in America, the uncles and the fathers turn in the sons.
Right, yeah.
And again, this family material is why you again get Sicilian. Now, my parents were my ancestors not from Sicily, but that family notion evolves into these notions of the outsider is the enemy. Again, in-group, out-group morality. The family comes first, and then the group outside is your enemy.
Right.
And again, this plays endlessly in secret societies, which I should also mention, sanctions come in. Some years ago I was reading, and I was stunned by it. There was a mobster, I think he was in Chicago. Again, it was a caricature of it. He was punishing mobster who had misbehaved and broken the rules. And he had him stripped naked and had his wife, mother, and children urinate on him. And I remember thinking, what kind of sick person did this? And then years later, I'm researching. That's actually a punishment. For example, mentioned the Calabrian mob. If you break a rule, they may put a financial penalty on you, like a fee. Mm-hmm. And then the next level is they will humiliate you. Now, in their case, they'll bring in other mobsters, and they'll rub feces on you. They strip you naked, and it's to send a message that you don't do this again.
Yeah, right.
And then the highest penalty is expulsion. And if you're expelled, they're probably going to kill you.
Yeah.
That's just a nice way of saying, we're going to kill you. And secret societies often have these rules, blood in, blood out. You don't leave without blood. For example, most of the outlaw groups. Now, we have these groups that emerge in American prisons that, I won't mention the name because I don't want them coming after me. But we got this, it may not even be true because it was said during congressional testimony in the 80s, and sometimes people make things up. But they said, as part of, not only was it blood in and blood out, but as part of the initiation, and this is to me interesting, they had to, again, horrific to the audience, they had to have, frankly, have sex with a girl, young girl, an elderly woman, and a corpse. And that was the initiation process.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting about this is it reminds us of the so-called Catalan conspiracy in ancient Rome. They were conspiring to overthrow the government. They got caught, so we have the enemies writing the stories. So it could be exaggerated. But all the men involved were drinking a child's blood mixed with wine. And the notion of this is, as part of the initiation, you do something that puts you beyond the pale of humanity. That you can't, for example, another member can't think you out.
Sure. Because
he has done something equally horrible.
Right.
And in the really hardcore illegal groups, that's what goes on. The initiation, now again, Freemasons don't do this, but the initiation involves something that puts you beyond the pale.
Right.
And now you may say, why would people do this? Again, it's power and it's money.
Yeah. I have a feeling with the Freemasons especially that you have a lot of people involved at the lower level of Freemasonry who have
they have no idea.
They have no idea what's going on. They have no access to any of these special rituals, because I know Freemasons, and I look at them and I go, there's nobody who is imparting any secrets on you, because you obviously can't keep your mouth shut. You're at the bar every night. You just have the Freemasonry tattoo on your leg or whatever, but there's nobody giving you any special information. So I'm guessing it's a very rare thing to move up levels.
Remember I said that to become a Freemason in the first 3 degrees, you have to approach them. Mm-hmm. To get into the upper levels, they have to ask you.
Yeah.
Similar things in Scientology. You can't get the upper levels unless they ask you. You just can't ask.
It also costs a tremendous amount of money, too,
yes.
Right?
Well, see, that's the thing they disparage, but Scientology argues, first of all, it's all voluntary. You don't have to do it. And secondly, I mentioned I have cancer. I probably have run up medical bills, my insurance by and large pays for it, of at least $500,000. Yeah. And they're saying, how can the medical profession can charge this? And we're going to turn you into a healthy, all-powerful Thetan eventually. Sure. I should mention, now, outsiders disparage this. Oh, and before I finish that, I should mention on the Freemasons, 33-degree Masons of the York Rite in England, they must be invited, and there's probably 75 of them total.
Right.
It's a really elite group. So your average Freemason, the 600,000, they're, again, ordinary guys throwing darts in pubs.
Right.
Although it does help them to make business ties, relationships.
Which is probably why they got involved in the first place.
Yes. Yeah. But if you show a special ability, and I should mention, is this everybody's egos do this, because I was much younger then in the 1980s, and they tell me you have the destiny to write. Sure. And I remember thinking, I'm older now, and I think, okay, I was probably just the guy here at the right time. But it does, to feel that you're a part of a special elite. And I think it's more of a male flaw than a female flaw. This is why there are female secret societies, but they're far fewer in number, and they're very different in nature. And again, they just a whole different type of bread there. But the males like this power and special rituals and knowledge and so forth.
You're part of the group, and
yes.
and you're the best of the best. And I think that goes from everything from your street gang where dad isn't in the house, and they bring you in and make you part of this group, to all the way up to like your Navy SEALs who have
yes.
gone through these trials and tribulations far beyond what us normal humans could go through, and now they find themselves in this other group of alpha males who are all have the same mindset where we are the best of the best. And then those guys, they try to retire, they don't let them retire, and hey, what are you, a quitter? You don't want to quit. And we see that everywhere.
Yes.
In good ways where you have your military institutions, and then in bad ways where but it's always the same ritual to bring these people together, it seems.
Yes, and again, special power, special elite, and secret knowledge. And secrecy also in itself. In fact, Hannah Arendt, noted German Jewish scholar who managed to survive and wrote The Origins of Totalitarianism over here, said real power begins where secrecy begins. And the secret itself doesn't even have to be that profound, as long as it's secret and it's held to just certain people. Now, I also should mention that when I was in Glasgow, that's when I started to notice it, because Scotland has really strong Freemasonry. They have the Scottish Rite up there. Mm-hmm. And then there's, of course, that interesting legend that the Templars, who were a medieval secret society of knights, that they survived. They weren't destroyed, as official history says. The official history, they were originally formed in the 11th century, actually 12th century, and they were to protect the pilgrims to the Holy Land, and that they were to be the highest of the high. They would be knights who also lived the life of monks. And the story was, to be a Templar, you had to be a noble on all sides. All your grandparents had to be of noble blood, have no debts, and be unmarried, and have no felony crime accusations against you. They rejected people. The story is one of the reasons King Philippe le Bel of France turned on them. He was rejected as a young man. He was the prince, and they wouldn't let him in the Templars. Of course, he probably wanted their money. But they had secret initiations. The Pope gave them all kinds of independent power. A Templar cannot be tried in regular courts. And then ultimately, in the 14th century, the Church and the King of France turn on them, and they're all arrested. The Templar leaders invited back. This is Jacques de Molay. De Molay is actually a youth organization of the Freemasons today, and he's invited back to be a witness at one of the baptism rituals, I believe it was, and then they're all arrested on Friday the 13th, 1307. Story is that's the origin of the unlucky day. Jacques de Molay was tortured, including they pulled the skin off his belly and his thighs to torture him. Yeah. And then he's burned alive. And there are claims that official history says they were destroyed, that some of them got away, and we do know some did get away, went to Scotland, one of the few areas that didn't persecute the Templars, and eventually evolved into the Freemasons. It's a great story that when the king, now the story is when they went underground, the Freemasons declared eternal hatred to crowns and altars. There have been allegations for years that they're anti-religious. That's why the Roman Catholic Church denounces them. That they've been involved in revolutions like the French Revolutions, the American Revolution. And the story is that they've been working for years to overthrow kings and churches. And there's a story that when Louis XVI, who's beheaded by the guillotine during the French Revolution, he's being held in a former Templar castle where they held him prisoner with his wife and child. Then he's taken in a dung cart. Thousands of people, a few 100,000 people showed up to spit on him, hurl animal feces, garbage. He's beheaded, and they're cheering. And the story is, as the blade fell, there was a cheer, and then there was a groan from the crowd, and then the executioner held up the severed head and said, they always said this, behold the head of a traitor. And the story is, not in official history books, someone in the crowd shouted, Jacques de Molay, we have avenged thee. Now, every revolution since, with one exception, has been anti-church and anti-monarchy. Russian, Chinese, so forth. American, technically ours is roughly the same time. But here's an interesting point. Now, Americans think that were not anti-religious, but in fact, founding fathers, only one of them who signed the Constitution went to church.
Right.
And they're all hostile to it. And Americans had a history of hostility to a religion. We're not a Christian nation. That's just the imagination. Well, at any rate, the one revolution in modern history that's not anti-religion is Iranian. Look at the hostility we have towards the Iranians.
Sure, right.
We supported the Shah, but not the takeover. Mm-hmm. And, we depict them as, now again, it could just be because they're a threat to Israel, an ally. But still, World War II bomber pilots used to say, when you encounter a lot of flak, you're on the target.
Right.
And whenever anybody goes after somebody, be it Jewish people, be it Masons, be it Scientologists, I get really suspicious.
Yeah, right.
It's not a simple hatred. Maybe they've got something that's important, or they're viewed as somehow dangerous to a status quo.
It's a good open-minded way to look at things, and in this country we tend to hate who everybody else hates, and it feeds off each other. So, like I said earlier, I've never understood the hatred for Jews seemingly worldwide, but it's interesting. Scientology has almost become a punchline here in the United States,
yes.
And I think a lot of that has to do with, I think if you didn't have people like Tom Cruise on television shows acting weird and mm-hmm. Saying all these crazy things, I think you have a lot less blowback towards them, because if you go down to, we spend a lot of time in Clearwater, Florida.
Oh, okay, that's one of the headquarters.
It's one of our favorite places to go, and it's not like these people are in the streets handing out brochures. It's not like they're, robbing banks or causing problems. If I don't understand why it's a problem for them to have their little temple and do good things. What and then you have the mosque down the street. What's the difference? Mm-hmm. Blind faith in religion one way or another always kind of freaks me out a little bit. Mm-hmm. But as long as they're not bothering me, that much of a problem.
You mentioned hate. What's really curious, because we have these anti-hate movements. Mm-hmm. Yet it never occurs to the anti-haters that they hate the haters.
Yeah.
And hate is hate is hate.
Well, the left is the far left and the far right are mirror images of each other now. You have violence on both sides, and that's one thing of that far left leaning these far left leaning groups is they're becoming incredibly violent against people they hate. And
one thing I should also throw in, because I caution people about going to these dangerous websites and so forth. What's really curious about United States intelligence services and FBI and federal marshals and stuff, they are really good at finding any kind of deviant behavior in the United States. They will monitor people, they'll catch them, they run sting operations all the time.
Yeah.
If you watch the movies, it looks as if the FBI solves crimes. Almost all of their people they catch are on sting operations or using undercover operatives or informants. Now, incidentally, the FBI never uses an FBI agent as an undercover operative. They will hire what are called stringers, who are actually maybe real criminals, who will penetrate the group and then compromise them or bring them down. Mm-hmm. Well, here's the rather curious part, is our intelligence services, which are really good internally, they can't catch anybody overseas.
Right.
And our intelligence services are really incompetent on finding people in Afghanistan or in Pakistan. And there's a reason for that. It's because Americans, if you're in the FBI or the CIA or the NSA, you want to sit in front of a computer screen with a suit on in Washington suburbs. If you really wanted to penetrate the Taliban, you'd have to actually go there, marry a local woman,
sure, right.
live on a dirt floor, and get intestinal worms.
Right.
And nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
So, but they're really good. In fact, I was stunned. There's a really curious group, probably never heard of them, called the Silent Brotherhood. And at one time, in the 1980s, 1/4 of the FBI were pursuing roughly 30 men. And they were knocking off armored cars and banks to finance a revolution. And they've made a couple films, but the films are so grossly distorted you can't even tell who they're talking about. And one's called Talk Radio, and the other one's called, The Brotherhood. It's got, who's the fellow that always, Baldwin Brothers? It's got one of the Baldwin brothers. Yeah. Plays Matthews, the character. Robert J. Matthews was the leader. And they were, again, not to get into these racist groups, they wanted a white homeland in the Pacific Northwest. And they were radicals and they were dangerous. But what struck me, 2 journalists wrote a book on the Silent Brotherhood. Robert J. Matthews was involved in radical activities in high school. He began with anti-income tax stuff. The FBI and the American federal government penetrated his high school group.
Wow.
They formed a secret society of high school boys that met in the desert. I think it was outside of Phoenix. And the federal government penetrated that.
Wow.
And it shows, I find that rather, most Americans would think they wouldn't bother with a bunch of teenage boys.
Right.
But it shows how widespread the net is.
Yeah, sure.
Now, once you start thinking this, so you can become paranoid really fast.
Yeah, yeah.
And I should mention, this is not my idea, but paranoia literally means irrational fear. But we have no word in the English language for irrational fear.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there have been people who have argued that there is no such thing as paranoia in psychology. It's been invented to discredit anyone who discovers the secrets.
Much like conspiracy theories.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I have a feeling there may be some element of truth in that.
Right.
And another interesting thing is comparing wild animals to domesticated animals. We forget because people in America love their pets. You said you just got a puppy.
Yeah.
They're slaves. And when we domesticate animals, it's really curious. Their brains get smaller and they become weaker.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Nietzsche famously said, we've taken the wolf and turned him into a dog.
Yeah.
This animal that we're afraid of now has the floppy ears. One curious thing is wild dogs they have erect ears only.
Right.
And we have the floppy ears. Wild dogs, canines, don't bark. We're not sure where that comes from.
Yeah.
And we've taken these animals. Now, we've only domesticated 14 animals, roughly, which is curious. Wild animals are naturally suspicious, but domesticated ones are not. And we view not being paranoid as normal behavior. But frankly, you should be.
Sure.
In fact,
it would have been a defense mechanism.
I'm on a small university campus. I can't believe I'll see it every night when school starts. There'll be these girls on the cross country. They're running by themselves as the sun's going down.
I just saw a young lady walking all by herself back behind where I was lost earlier. And
yes,
I think the same thing every time I see them.
You can't do that. But the people are too trusting.
Right.
And
either too trusting or too confident in their abilities to escape, which is
yes.
I'm 6 foot, 240 pounds. If I decide to take that girl, she is going to go. There's nothing she can do about it. And I tell this to my wife all the time. When we first met, she would run from her apartment down to the beach. She would jog down this trail through the woods, and she would go down to the beach to be with her friends. And I said, "You're done doing that. You're never doing that again. Are you insane?" And she's a weightlifter and strong, and you're never doing that again.
I can't believe people who camp.
Right.
Especially when you get these young people go out camping.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just too many dangerous characters.
Yeah.
And there have even been cases of I don't know, they cover this up in the news. There will be these wealthy people retire typically at a younger age, and they buy some $500,000 sailboat. They go to the Caribbean, and nobody ever sees them again.
Yeah. Because
you're sailing around, and some guy in a power boat could kill you, take your boat, rename it.
I had a friend in Key West, Florida, who was piloting his sailboat from Key West to the Bahamas. He came across a flipped over, what looked like a John boat, and he'd been around the block. He'd been a treasure diver. He'd known all this stuff. So when he saw this, he went down below and got his AR-15. And when they flipped the boat over, there was a guy underneath it pointing a gun at him. Well, he was above him pointing his AR-15 down at him. The guy put his hands up, and the guy took the sailboat, and he just went away and left the guy out there in the middle of the ocean in his John boat, whether that John boat could be righted and fixed. But he said, hey, that's what they do to you. They just wait. People aren't aware.
Which reminds me, we have these endless gun debates in the United States. I should mention that historically, the reason they put that in the Constitution was literally to resist the government. It wasn't to shoot criminals.
No, right.
Because they were rebels.
The Second Amendment is so vague when you actually read it. And I'm always amazed when people cite the Second Amendment. And I ask, have you actually read the Second Amendment? Because it's not as clear-cut as as people make it out to be. You know?
I should mention there's another radical group. They're called the Dominion people. They want to restore the Constitution with only the first 10 amendments or the Bill of Rights. Strip off all the other stuff.
Right.
Now these again are these ultra right types.
Sure.
And I should mention, in fact, what's really scary about some of this is we talk about stuff is developing. I mentioned the debt. The Federal Reserve is a lot of these right-wing groups go after the Federal Reserve, which is a peculiar. See, we approved this in 1913, and in fact, it was organized on Jekyll Island. You can't even make that up.
Right.
It's an island off of Georgia, and it's privately owned banks.
People don't understand that.
Yeah.
They think that's a government institution.
Yeah, it's no more federal than Federal Express. But what I'm concerned about, though, is since they formed it, our money has declined 98%,
Right.
the value. And we've got to not only get ourselves out of debt, but we've got to fix this, the notion that Switzerland was the last country in the world that went off the gold standard. They took it off, I forget the years, around 2000, 2001. The Swiss franc had some gold backing. Our money used to have gold backing and silver at one point. Mm-hmm. And the money now is fiat money, has no real value except people think it does.
I just heard a podcast with Peter Schiff, the economist, who stated just that the next bubble he thought was going to happen was the currency bubble because it's not backed by anything, you know. And he encouraged people to invest in real gold, not
make sure it's not salted.
Exactly, or not salted, or not paper that says you have gold.
Yeah, there's people that buy paper documents that say that they have. I mean, I can't believe that to be that clueless.
Right, that's what he's saying, yeah.
Another, and I actually forget the author's name. I just recently read it's a Chinese-American author. And he was pointing out that we've slowly developed, and I can't remember the name of the book, it's really excellent, I wish I could recall it, that now, traditionally the stock market, you'd buy pieces of stock, and then you could actually vote at the stock meetings, and also they got dividends every year. Now, I invest in the stock market, but I buy granny stocks like Duke Energy,
sure, right, yeah.
That they pay dividends and I can vote. Well, a lot of these so-called hot stocks, like Tesla, they buy them and they have no voting rights and no dividends. And in a sense, it looks like a Ponzi scheme. Mm-hmm. The fact that this Chinese-American writer has argued that as long as it keeps going up, nobody complains, but when it crashes, see, over half the people in Bernie Madoff's pyramid scheme actually made money.
Yeah.
They leave this out. You don't want to be the last person in.
Sure.
And this is how Social Security is a pyramid scheme as well.
Yeah.
As long as there are more people paying in than drawing out, it makes money.
And as you start to live longer, that becomes more and more of a problem.
So, but for such a wealthy country, it's kind of curious that we have so many. We're almost on the precipice of disaster, it seems.
I think tradition is the only thing keeping America running. It's traditions and people's lack of enthusiasm for any kind of revolutionary thought. You know, they're going to work and they're going to watch Ohio State football on the weekends. They don't have time for revolution, and this is the way it's always been, and this is the way it's always going to be. But you have, you know, and then these groups that are acting in revolutionary ways are discredited so quickly that they're made out to be lunatics, you know. But I do think tradition is the only thing that's holding the house of cards up right now.
You know, you reminded me of a comment a couple of years ago. There were student protests going on, like the Wall Street stuff. And one of the math professors there sent an email and said, should we be prepared for a student protest? And a sociology professor, I'll even mention, he's a friend of mine, Jim Miller, teaches. He's got a really dry sense of humor. And he wrote back on his general email, because our students at Shawnee State are really kind of low-key. And he said, to get Shawnee State students at a protest, we'd have to give them extra credit.
Well, we talked about Oberlin. They did that in Oberlin. They gave extra credit for partaking in protests up there.
Really?
Yeah. We had a local business, and I hope I get this right. I could be getting this wrong, but a young man stole a piece of pastry from this bakery, and as he was running out the door, the guy tackled him and held him there until the police came. And the students protest because this was a student, and boycott this bakery, and there was protests in the streets, and then that turned into problems with the university, but they were given some of the professors were offering extra credit for anyone who took part in it. So.
We are starting classes on Monday. One thing I always say at the start of a history class is I'll say that I believe that the function of a historian is to make the dead live again, and not put the living to sleep. And I probably talk quite a bit of time here, maybe. But I hope I don't.
I don't think anyone's asleep. We probably, I don't know how long we've been going here. Oh yeah, a while. But we should probably talk about your new book though, and what you're doing with it.
Well, it's in the early stages. The last book, which I like to plug as well, is called A Traveler's. It shows how I'm a generalist. It's A Traveler's Guide to the Afterlife. It's available on Amazon and some Barnes and Noble and so forth.
That's how we quote unquote met the first time we were on Mark Eddy's internet radio show, and that was a fascinating book.
Well, thank you.
And I think if anybody, at the time I was reading it, I just had a friend pass away, and I had all these thoughts running through my brain about it, and I had done this podcast where I basically just got on the day after he died and did this half-hour rant. It was called Requiem for Bubba, and it was a great time to read that book, to see how these cultures throughout history have looked at death and the afterlife, and I don't think it's as cut and dry as people think.
No, what's really curious about America is it's sophisticated in science and technology, but in terms of metaphysics and religion, it's really simple.
Yeah.
And we mentioned this earlier, how some people just don't realize how rich it is out there. And plus, I literally give information on how to game the system, like how to get into a good afterlife.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of tips like
that. Yeah. And that's how, again, maybe that's the thing. And that's why, and then I thought I was done with the publications. I've got a novel, it's a horror novel, called The Cannibal Within. I have this Odin Brotherhood book. I have a handbook for rebels and outlaws. I should give you. I think you'd like that one. Give you a copy.
I'd love to read it.
And I'll give you a copy. I'm pretty sure I got one in here somewhere. Excellent. And then this new project is going to be on secret societies and conspiracies. And we're talking again about a wide variety of groups and ideas. It's not going to be, regrettably, I was amazed. I've been doing all the research for years, but they're really bad books on the subject.
Yeah.
Because the historians are too literal. Mm-hmm. They seem to misunderstand that the prime function of, for example, the mythic histories is to orient people in the universe. And the Rosicrucians talk about Christian Rosenkreutz founded this, and then we buried him, and we found his tomb, and it had all this secret knowledge in it. And they say, well, this can't be real. I was stunned when I published the Odin Brotherhood. One of the most common criticisms, see, they claim they've existed since 1421. An unbroken succession. Mm-hmm. And I was always amazed when I got people criticizing online, posting reviews. That's what they have trouble with. I mean, I thought they would say, you mean there are people in the 20th century and 21st century believe in the pagan gods?
Right.
No, there was not a problem with that. It was this history. And again, as a historian, I know that most of what we teach in classes is falsified myth anyway. We talked about this earlier in the South.
Written by the winners.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, people don't ask questions when the Alamo occurred and all these people were massacred, and then Santa Anna is captured by the Texans soon after. He lives. Mm-hmm. Well, it doesn't appear in the standard history textbooks.
Right.
But the Houston and Stephen Austin, they were all Freemasons, and so was Santa Anna.
Really?
Yeah. Almost certainly that's how he survived. They let him go. And again, this is, and by the way, in Freemasonic, they make the first three levels. It says very clearly, murder and treason are accepted. For example, if your brother commits a crime, murder or treason, the Masonic tie not going to help you. But once you get to the Royal Archmason and above, it doesn't make the exception anymore. Right. And again, a lot of secret societies will do that. The Japanese Yakuza, and everybody that's listening to this has probably supported the Japanese Yakuza. That's a Japanese, and incidentally, whereas the Mafia, for example, in Sicily probably has 3,000 members, the Yakuza has a couple 100,000.
Right.
And they've penetrated major industries, including car manufacturers. So you probably indirectly made a contribution. And the Japanese are actually more sophisticated when it comes to, rather than launch these crusades to destroy them, they think organized crime makes crime more orderly. And it does.
I believe that 100% because ever since the war on the mafia in this country, the streets have gone wild.
Yeah.
The mafia kept everything under control.
Well, it was famous that when Al Capone lived in Cicero, Illinois, there was no crime in Cicero.
Right. Yeah, and these neighborhoods in downtown Cleveland, where I'm from, they didn't have this before. You had the mafia committing crimes,
Yes.
but the neighborhoods were safe,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have that anymore.
And it's still today, if you go to Milan and they steal your car, you go to the police and they'll keep you there for all day and they'll never find your car.
Right.
Your car is probably not going to be stolen in Palermo because the mob doesn't like that. But if it is stolen, you can actually go to the mob and they'll get the car back.
Yeah.
And if they don't, you have to pay a fee.
Right.
But if you don't get the car back, they'll steal one just like it. Probably better.
Either way.
Late model.
Either way you leave with a car, that's all that matters.
So that's, again, how it really works.
I
So
like
this new book, I'm not sure the working title yet, but it will be on something to do with the mystery and power of secret societies and the conspiracies behind them. And I'll be not only dealing with the standard groups such as the Templars and the Freemasons and so forth, but also the Thuggee of India, which is a legendary group of murderers who hunt humans thinking they worship the goddess of death, Kali. And everybody they kill goes to a paradise, and they go to the paradise by killing for the goddess. And they always strangle. And I'll be talking about groups like that, the Yakuza, Drangheta, again, pagan secret societies such as the Odin Brotherhood, because I know so much about it. But I'll be doing, and also, well, let's talk about really dangerous secret society, because everybody thinks it's the mob. The ones that I really fear, a group, for example, called the Jason. Now, we're even not certain what the name means. Some have suggested it's named after July, August, September, and so forth, October, November. They were formed in the late 1950s. It was after the Russians launched Sputnik. And we tried soon after to launch a satellite. It was a disaster. The satellite was only weighing 3 pounds. The Russians were already at Sputnik 2, which launched a dog, and it was over 100 pounds, the satellite. We launched a 3-pound satellite on live TV, and it blew up.
Yeah.
In fact, the press at the time called it, what was it? Kaputnik. And soon after, Eisenhower formed what is now known as the Jason. And they're supposed, he said, to make the weapons, the unimagined weapons of the future. And now you say, these are leading researchers in physics, chemistry, biology, Nobel Prize winners. But see, we always think it's going to be mobsters who dropped out of high school that cause all the trouble. If the world ends, it's going to come from groups like this.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they're starting to play with some really dangerous things. Now, originally it was chemistry that was dangerous. They invented the chemical weapons in World War I. Then we got the physicists getting really dangerous, the nuclear bombs and atomic bombs, first seen in World War II. Now it's the biologists out of control. In fact, in the 1990s, and it was stopped by a woman biology professor at Oregon State, and I sadly forget her name because we should all remember her, accompanied through genetic engineering and biology, had developed a kind of a new type of bacteria, I think it was, that would eat organic objects and turn it into alcohol. But then they discovered it wouldn't stop.
Right.
And if they had actually put this in nature, it could have destroyed all living things on the planet. And almost certainly, they'll be messing with some things. The wonderful novel Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut,
Yep.
he has the world ends because an alien civilization tries a new fuel on a flying saucer, and it destroys the universe. And it'll be some professor somewhere trying to get a grant and tenure.
Yeah.
Now, there were some alarms with the CERN collider, which I find very suspicious. It's in Switzerland. It accelerates subatomic particles, and they say it's for pure science. I don't know. There have been reports they're trying to, they're creating antimatter there. That'd be the ultimate bomb, because it would cause annihilation. And also that they could accidentally create a so-called black hole or something. But they have to put a clamp on some of this. Now, Americans don't realize this because it's not in the history books. When they first tested the first atomic bomb in New Mexico, some of the scientists there, including, I forget his name, he's the guy of Teller, suggested it was a theoretical possibility. See, if you just split an atom, it's a dud. The bomb worked because they caused a chain reaction.
Right.
He suggested it would ignite the atmosphere and destroy the planet.
They weren't sure what was actually going to happen.
And they still tested it. Now, Germany was already defeated. Japan was collapsing.
Right.
Another myth is we had to drop the bomb to end the war. It's what it is. Because of frontier warfare against the Indians, for some reason the Americans developed unconditional surrender notions. That we have to completely pummel you. The Japanese were asking for peace already. They'd been beaten. But we had to drop the bomb on them. 2 of them. But when they tested it, speaking of which, there's another conspiracy theory that they weren't supposed to even have that bomb until later 1945, and we got enriched material that we captured from the Germans.
Right.
And I have
scientists.
Yes, and I have a feeling that's what actually went on. We've proclaimed it. Another myth is that the Russians stole, because they detonated their first bomb in 1949, that they stole it from the Americans, the technology. In fact, the Russian spies were the scientists.
Right.
They weren't stealing it, they were making it.
Yeah, Dan Carlin has a great podcast where he talks about that, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. My favorite quote is, they were talking to, I believe, one of the generals, and they were asking him about the next World War, and he said, I don't know what weapons the next World War will be fought with, but the Fourth World War will be fought with sticks and stones.
Yes.
So bomb them back into the Stone Ages, which is... that's a brutal statement.
Yes, and I suspect now, when historians always predict the future, we're wrong, but it's going to be the doomsday will be the biology.
Yeah.
Although they do have allegations, now this is as early as 1960s, of the cobalt bomb, which Carroll Quigley suggested. Now, this guy was a Georgetown University professor. Now, he appears in all kinds of conspiracy theories. He's a professor of history. Bill Clinton, when he accepted the nomination in 1992, quotes and mentions Quigley, which is curious because this guy lights up conspiracy boards all over the place.
Right.
He claimed that there was a hidden Anglo-American elite that really manipulates and controls the world, which sounds like Trilateral Commission, Bilderbergers, all this sort of thing. And speaking of which, I mean, the Clintons are just...
they're neck deep in something.
Well, what I find interesting, the New York Times ran this, because I'll be talking about in this new book, among other things, the Red Sect, the Sect Rouge, which is a secret society of sorcerers within voodoo in Haiti. Haitians believe if you're really successful and powerful, you've done some kind of ritual to the dangerous Loa, they're called. These are these powerful gods. And by the way, voodoo is not what you see in the movies. It's actually very interesting. It's a legitimate African religion. And like all ancient religions, it's not good or evil. It's how you use it.
Right.
And you can summon the dangerous gods, and they will do things, but there's a payoff. On their honeymoon, and you can find this online, and the New York Times mentioned in this guy's obituary, he was the voodoo priest. The Clintons went to Haiti in the 1970s. Now, who goes there for their honeymoon?
Right.
And Bill Clinton mentions in his biography of himself that they went to a voodoo ritual. And I guarantee you that Haitians believe that's how they became so powerful.
Yeah.
And they'd also believe that the way she lost is Donald must have called in another. That's what they would believe.
Powerful juju.
Yeah. And but it's that you just don't become. And again, this American notion that hard work and honesty lead to success is not how it works.
Right.
It's connections. It's manipulation.
Who you know.
Yes. I remember my dad telling me that he said that he invested in the stock market as well, which I do. I learned it from him. But he said, if you work hard, don't have debts, and save all your money, you're not going to be prosperous.
Right.
But if you have to invest it,
let it ride.
Yes. And that's real life.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, I want to encourage everyone to get your book as soon as it comes out. And when you get a working title, let me know, and we'll put it out there on social media for you.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank you for coming on the show. And
can I mention my website?
Yes,
stuff
please
I do.
It's
my name, markmirabello.com, MARKMIRA, B as in boy, ELLO. And I've got some of my earlier podcasts. I, in fact, had that pleasure with you and your colleague, the other Mark.
Yeah, that was my first time doing that with him.
So this has been a wonderful opportunity. And this man drove 200 miles.
200 miles, yep.
And it has to drive 200 miles back.
Yeah, I may have to. We were supposed to go to dinner. I may have to skip out on that because I ran a little bit long. But I want to thank you for coming down, for having me down, and I'd love to do this again sometime.
Okay.
Thank you, Doc.
Well, thank you. It's been wonderful. To buy you dinner. Is it going to take?
Yeah.